Hey everyone, this is Michael with Christopher Street Tours, and on today's episode of Queer History, we're going to be talking about the Stonewall Riots, the famous uprising that occurred in 1969 and is often known as the spark of the modern gay rights movement. This is part 2 of a 3-part mini-series where we break down the Stonewall Riots into pre-Stonewall, the Nights of Stonewall, and then post-Stonewall. During this video, we'll be talking more about what actually happened during the nights of the Stonewall Riots. The first night of the uprising was June 28, 1969. It was a Friday night, or technically Saturday morning, around 1:20 a.m. Around this time, police were ordered to clean up the streets of New York, which in other words just meant closing down all of the gay bars, but especially the ones with drag queens and gender nonconforming folks. Raids started by 2 undercover police officers going into the Stonewall Inn. When the police chief didn't hear any response from the undercover officers, he sent in more police officers for a formal raid. Police started checking IDs of the patrons at the bar, and for the most part, if your gender expression matched whatever was on your ID card, then you were free to go. However, if your gender expression did not match the legal sex on your ID card, the police would often conduct what they called bathroom checks, where they would literally take people into the bathrooms and check their genitalia. This invasive practice was problematic in many ways, but from what we know, people that were held inside of the bar started to refuse these bathroom checks. Everyone else decided to stick around Stonewall that night, in the land that's now known as Christopher Park, instead of going home, going to another bar, or leaving the premise. The crowd, which was about 800 people, were all gathered outside, waiting for the police to come out of the bar. As they were waiting outside, a performer was dragged out by the police, dragged and beaten over the head, and that's when she called out into the crowd, "Why don't you guys do something?" And at that point, that was the call to action for the crowd to act. LGBTQ patrons that were waiting outside started storming the police cars. They began throwing anything they could at the police, including broken beer bottles, bricks from a nearby construction site, and even high heel shoes. Some debate about who actually threw the first brick, which is often attributed to Marsha P. Johnson. However, interviews have confirmed that Marsha actually was not around Stonewall when the riot first began and didn't join until later that morning. What's important to keep in mind, though, is that based on the demographics of the bar, it was most likely a trans person or a drag queen of color who threw the first brick. The police had to retreat back inside of Stonewall after they had come out, barricading the front doors, keeping themselves inside for their own safety and their own protection. The crowd outside pulled up a parking meter and tried to use that as a battering ram to get through the doors, while others started lighting trash cans on fire and trying to throw those through the windows to get to the police. A kick line even formed outside of Stonewall, with drag queens and trans women singing, "We are the Stonewall girls, we wear our hair in curls." Eventually, the tactical police force was called, often known as the Riot Police, which helped the local police officers break free from the riots. However, due to the complicated layout of the Greenwich Village around Christopher Street and the Stonewall Inn, it was impossible for the Riot Police to close in on the rioters and stop the protesting. The police went on chasing the patrons of Stonewall Inn that night throughout the streets of Greenwich Village until about 4 in the morning, until people got tired or bored. However, people came back for a second night of protesting, and this lasted for 6 consecutive nights. On the second night, the riots were in full force, with thousands of people showing up around the Stonewall Inn, yelling chants like gay power and gay rights. People from other movements also came to support, holding up protest signs and chanting as well. There was also a heavy police presence, which also lasted 6 nights, with violence occurring from both ends. Craig Rodwell, the owner of the Oscar Wilde Memorial Bookshop, which we talk about in an earlier video, and his partner Fred Sargent distributed 5,000 leaflets during this time. The leaflets demanded for the eradication of police and mafia from gay bars. They also called for gay people to own their own establishments and for a boycott on all mafia-operated gay bars. Eventually, on the 6th night, the riots dispersed, the Stonewall Inn closed, and the Stonewall Uprising had ended. To hear about the aftermath of the Stonewall Uprising, check back next time for our third part in this 3-part mini-series, where I'll talk more about the importance and the lasting impacts of the Stonewall Uprising on LGBTQ history. And that concludes this episode of Queer History with Christopher Street Tours. Be sure to subscribe to our channel below and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Christopher Street Tours for more queer history. Until next time. Christopher Street Tours is an LGBTQ-owned organization. Our mission is to make LGBTQ history accessible and engaging, sharing stories and uplifting voices from those who paved the way before us. For more information and resources, please visit ChristopherStreetTours.com.